When Randonautica first went viral in 2020, I didn't think much of it. An app that spits out random coordinates and sends you off to explore. It seemed more like a gimmick than anything else. But then I started seeing videos pop up online, people discovering abandoned houses, weird objects in the woods, even a suitcase with human remains. It was fascinating and terrifying all at once that I wasn't planning to download it, but one boring summer night, my friends Michelle and Alex convinced me. We'd been hanging out at my house, desperate for something to do. "Let's set an intention for something spooky," Michelle said with a mischievous grin. "Why do you always want to get us killed?" I joked, but I downloaded the app anyway. That we decided on mystery as our intention and let the app generate coordinates. The first 3 spots were dead ends, literally. One was someone's backyard, another pointed to the middle of a lake, and the third was fenced off. But the fourth? That one got under my skin immediately. It was a location just outside of town, near an abandoned farm that everyone in our area grew up hearing rumors about. People talked about strange noises coming from there at night, whispers of a fire decades ago, and how no one ever saw the owners again. That I should have trusted my gut and stayed home, but curiosity got the better of me. We piled into Alex's car and drove out there, the excitement in the air shifting to unease as we left the familiar streets of town behind. The road narrowed as we got closer, trees crowding the sides and forming a tunnel that our headlights barely pierced. "This is the part where the creepy music starts playing," I said, half joking to calm my nerves. Michelle didn't laugh. "It's not funny. This feels wrong." When we reached the coordinates, the road ended in a dirt trail. I checked the app again, my phone glowing in the darkness. "It's just a short walk from here," I said, trying to sound confident that we got out, and the woods swallowed us whole. Every sound felt amplified, the crunch of our footsteps, the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. None of us spoke much as we followed the narrow path. After about 10 minutes, we reached a clearing with a massive, gnarled tree at the center. Its branches stretched out like claws, and beneath it was a small pile of rocks arranged in a deliberate pattern. Alex was the first to approach it, shining his flashlight on the stones. "What is this?" he muttered, crouching down. Something glinted among the rocks, catching the light. He reached for it and pulled out a rusted key. "This is weird," he said, turning it over in his hand. "What kind of key is that?" Michelle asked, hanging back near me. Before Alex could answer, there was a loud snap behind us, a branch breaking underfoot. I spun around, my flashlight darting across the trees. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice shaking. "It's probably an animal," Alex said, but he didn't sound convinced. The 3 of us stood there, frozen, listening. The forest was silent now, too silent. Even the sound of crickets had disappeared. "We should go," Michelle whispered, gripping my arm. "This is a bad idea." We started back the way we came, but something felt off. The trail didn't look the same. The trees seemed closer together, their twisted shapes looming over us like they were alive. And then I saw it, footprints in the dirt ahead of us. "Those aren't ours," I said, my heart pounding. Alex stopped, his flashlight trembling in his hand. "You're sure?" I nodded. The prints were deep and large, like someone had been walking barefoot but deliberately. They weren't there when we came in. Suddenly, a faint humming broke the silence. It was distant at first, barely audible, but it sent chills racing down my spine. The 3 of us stood frozen, straining to locate the sound. It was melodic but distorted, like an old record playing too slow. What the hell is that? Michelle whispered. I don't know, I said, gripping my flashlight tighter. The humming grew louder, closer, and the hair on the back of my neck stood on end. I turned toward the sound, my flashlight catching a flash of movement just beyond the tree line. A figure stood there, half hidden in the shadows. It was tall, its limbs unnaturally long, and its head was tilted at a sharp angle that it didn't move. It just stood there, watching us. We froze, staring at the figure in the shadows. It didn't move, but the humming didn't stop. It grew louder, almost vibrating through the air, and I swear I could feel it in my chest. Go, I whispered, barely able to get the word out. Michelle grabbed my arm, and Alex shoved the key into his pocket. As we backed away, the figure took a step forward. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, like a puppet on strings. My flashlight flickered, and for a split second, I saw its face, pale and stretched, with hollow black eyes. Run! Alex shouted, and we bolted down the trail. The humming grew more chaotic, echoing all around us. Branches tore at my arms as we ran, but I didn't dare look back. The trail felt endless, looping on itself. We've been here before. Michelle screamed, her voice cracking. Behind us, I heard it, the sound of footsteps. Fast. Too fast. We were running blind, panic coursing through us as the sound of footsteps grew louder behind us. Every instinct told me not to look back, but I couldn't help it. I turned my head, and what I saw nearly made me stumble. The figure wasn't alone anymore. Two more had joined it, their twisted forms weaving through the trees like predators on the hunt. Their movements were impossibly fast, their heads tilted at unnatural angles, hollow black eyes locked onto us. The humming was deafening now, discordant and broken, as if they were trying to form words but couldn't quite manage it. This way. Alex shouted, veering off the path and into the thick underbrush. Branches clawed at my arms and legs as we followed him, our flashlights bouncing wildly in the darkness. Michelle was sobbing, her breath hitching in panicked gasps, but she didn't stop running. The forest seemed alive, the trees twisting and shifting as if trying to trap us. Every sound, the crunch of leaves, the snap of branches, made my heart race faster. It felt like the figures were everywhere, just out of sight but close enough that I could feel their presence. Alex led us into a small clearing, where the moonlight spilled through the trees and illuminated the area. We skidded to a stop, gasping for air, but there was no relief. The humming stopped abruptly, plunging the forest into a silence so thick it felt suffocating. Where did they go? Michelle whispered, her voice trembling. Alex didn't answer. He was staring at the rusted key in his hand, turning it over and over as if it held some kind of answer. I think they're after this, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Then get rid of it. I snapped, every nerve in my body screaming that we had to move. Alex hesitated, clutching the key tighter. What if that makes it worse? What if? A sharp metallic scraping sound cut him off. It was faint at first, like nails on metal, but it grew louder with each passing second. The sound was coming from the edge of the clearing. That I spun around, my flashlight trembling in my hands, and saw them. All three figures stood at the tree line, their black eyes gleaming in the dim light. They didn't move. They just stood there, staring at us, their heads tilted in unison. The silence was unbearable, a weight pressing down on my chest. And then, as if someone had flipped a switch, the humming started again. It was louder this time, more chaotic, like static mixed with distorted voices, "We can't just stand here." Michelle screamed, backing away from the figures. "We have to do something." "Give them the key," I said, my voice shaking. Alex looked at me, his face pale. "What if they're not here for the key? What if it's just a distraction? They're going to kill us." Michelle shouted, tears streaming down her face. "Throw it away, Alex." Alex hesitated, then took a deep breath and hurled the key as far as he could. It landed with a metallic clink at the base of a gnarled tree on the other side of the clearing. For a moment, nothing happened. The figures didn't move, the humming didn't stop. And then, in unison, they turned their heads toward the tree. The humming grew louder, almost unbearable, as they moved toward the key. Their jerky, unnatural movements made my skin crawl, but I couldn't look away. As they reached the tree, they bent down, their long fingers clawing at the dirt where the key had landed. "Now's our chance," Alex whispered, tugging at my arm. That we turned and ran, plunging back into the forest. My legs felt like they were made of lead, every step an effort, but fear kept me moving. Behind us, the humming faded into the distance, replaced by the sound of our ragged breathing and the crunch of leaves underfoot. After what felt like hours, we burst out of the woods and onto the dirt road where we'd parked the car. The sight of Alex's car was like a lifeline, and we sprinted toward it, fumbling with the keys in our panic. "Get in, get in!" I shouted, shoving Michelle into the back seat. Alex started the car, the engine roaring to life as we tore down the dirt road. For a long time, none of us spoke. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional sob from Michelle. I kept glancing out the back window, half expecting to see those figures chasing after us, but the road behind us was empty. Finally, Alex broke the silence. "What the hell were those things?" I didn't have an answer. None of us did. All I knew was that I would never open that app again. We didn't stop driving until we reached the edge of town. Alex pulled into an all-night diner parking lot, and for the first time since leaving the woods, we exhaled. The silence in the car was suffocating, the kind that presses in when no one knows what to say. "Did we lose them?" Michelle finally whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "I don't think they followed us," Alex said, though he sounded far from confident. He gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white that I glanced back down the road, half expecting to see those figures lurking in the shadows. There was nothing, just the empty street stretching into darkness. "What the hell were those things?" I asked, more to myself than anyone else. No one answered. It felt like trying to make sense of a nightmare, something you know doesn't belong in reality but still leaves its mark. After a few minutes, Alex spoke again. "That key. It felt wrong. Like it wasn't just some old piece of metal." Michelle shuddered. "I don't care what it was. I never want to go back there." I nodded in agreement. Whatever we had stumbled into, it wasn't meant for us. That we sat there for a while, waiting for our hearts to stop racing. None of us wanted to admit it, but we were too scared to drive straight home. As if somehow, those things would know where to find us. After what felt like hours in the diner parking lot, Alex finally broke the silence. "We should go home. Pretend this never happened." Michelle looked at him like he was insane. "Pretend? Alex, we just got chased through the woods by whatever those things were. How do we pretend that away?" Alex didn't respond, just turned the key in the ignition. The headlights flickered on, illuminating the dark road ahead. We don't have any other choice, he muttered. Let's just get out of here. We drove in silence, the eerie hum of the engine filling the space where conversation should have been. The road stretched endlessly in front of us, empty and unwelcoming. It was only when we hit the edge of town that I started to feel the tension ease, until I glanced at the dashboard clock that it was 3:17 a.m. That couldn't be right. We'd left the woods hours ago. Even with how long we'd stayed in the diner parking lot, there was no way it was that late. Hey, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. What time do you guys have? Michelle checked her phone and frowned. It's 3:17. Alex glanced at the car's clock and then at his watch. That doesn't make sense, he said, his voice tight. We've only been gone, 2 hours? Maybe the clocks are wrong, Michelle offered weakly, but none of us believed it. The silence returned, heavier now. Something wasn't right, and we all felt it. When Alex pulled up in front of my house, I practically jumped out of the car. You guys are staying at my place tonight, I said firmly. I'm not doing this alone. Michelle didn't argue, and Alex looked too shaken to care. We piled into my living room, locking every door and window behind us. The light stayed on. None of us wanted to be left in the dark. For a while, we sat on the couch, the TV playing some mindless sitcom to distract us. But as the hours ticked by, the unease only grew. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind outside felt like a warning, and then came the knock that was soft at first, barely audible. But it was enough to send a chill down my spine. Michelle froze, her eyes darting to the front door. Did you hear that? Alex nodded, his face pale. Yeah. I heard it. We sat in silence, waiting, but the knock came again, louder this time, more insistent. The knock came again, louder now, echoing through the house. None of us moved, frozen in place on the couch. Don't answer it, Michelle whispered, clutching a throw pillow like it could protect her. I wasn't planning to, I muttered, but my eyes stayed locked on the door. The knock turned into a slow, deliberate pounding, as if whoever, or whatever, was out there was growing impatient. Alex stood up, his jaw tight. I'm looking, he said, heading for the window. Don't. Michelle hissed, but it was too late. Alex pulled the curtain back just enough to peek outside. What do you see? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Alex didn't answer at first. He just stared, his breathing shallow. Then he let the curtain fall and stepped back, his face pale. There's nobody there, he said, but he didn't sound convinced. The pounding stopped, leaving a suffocating silence behind. For a moment, I thought maybe it was over. Then we heard it, a faint humming, coming from somewhere inside the house. The humming grew louder, spreading through the house like an invisible presence. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, the walls, the ceiling, even the floor beneath our feet. No way, Alex muttered, backing toward the couch. It can't be inside. We locked everything. I grabbed my phone and fumbled to turn on the flashlight. Stay close, I said, the beam trembling as I pointed it down the hallway. Where's it coming from? Michelle whispered, her voice barely audible over the eerie sound. The three of us crept toward the source of the noise. It led us to the basement door, which now stood slightly ajar. That didn't make sense. I'd locked it earlier, I was sure of it. You've got to be kidding me, Alex said, gripping the doorknob. Don't open it, Michelle pleaded, but Alex was already pulling it wide. The flashlight beam revealed the dark staircase leading down. The humming was deafening now, resonating in our skulls. "I'm not going down there," I said firmly, but before I could stop him, Alex started descending the steps. "Alex, wait!" Michelle called, but he didn't stop. We had no choice but to follow. The basement was colder than it should have been, the kind of cold that feels alive, wrapping around your skin and seeping into your bones. My flashlight wavered as we reached the bottom, revealing cluttered shelves and shadows that seemed to stretch and shift with every step. The humming was unbearable now, a constant vibration that made it hard to think. At the far end of the basement, something caught my light, a small wooden box sitting on the floor, its surface scratched and weathered. "What the hell is that?" Michelle whispered, gripping my arm. Alex didn't answer. He was drawn to the box, moving toward it like he was in a trance. "Alex, don't," I said, stepping forward, but it was too late. He crouched down and opened it. Inside was the rusted key. Michelle let out a shaky gasp. "How?" Alex picked it up, his hands trembling. As soon as his fingers closed around it, the humming stopped. Silence filled the basement, so thick and sudden it made my ears ring. And then we heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from the stairs behind us. I spun around, my flashlight catching the bottom step. The light hit something pale, feet, bare and unnaturally long, descending one step at a time. "Run," I whispered, but no one moved. The figure stepped fully into the beam of my flashlight, and my heart nearly stopped. Its face was the same as the one in the woods, hollow black eyes, stretched skin, and a head tilted at an impossible angle. It reached out a long, bony hand, its finger pointing straight at Alex. The key in his hand began to vibrate violently, as if it was trying to break free. "Give it back." Michelle screamed, but Alex was frozen. I didn't wait. I grabbed the key from his hand and hurled it across the room. It hit the ground with a metallic clink, and the figure's head snapped toward it. "Go!" I shouted, grabbing Alex and Michelle. We bolted up the stairs, slamming the basement door shut behind us. We didn't stop running until we were outside, collapsing on the lawn under the pale glow of the streetlight. Inside the house, the humming started again, faint but steady. "We're leaving," I said, my voice shaking. None of us argued. We packed up what little we had and left that night. I never went back to the house, and none of us ever mentioned Randonautica again. Whatever we'd awakened, it was still down there, and I wasn't going to stick around to see what it wanted next.